Good morning and welcome to the Caregiver Teleconnection. My name is Glenda Rogers and I'm going to be your facilitator for today's session. Today we're going to be talking about that important topic, disaster preparedness for caregivers, what to know now. Our presenters today are Dr. Elliot Sklar and Lucy Barylak. And before they get started with their presentation, let me tell you just a little bit about them. Lucy Barylak received her master's degree in social work from McGill University and has dedicated her career to supporting caregivers. Lucy was the founder and long-term care manager of the Caregiver Support Center at a respite program for family caregivers. There, she oversaw multidisciplinary training across caregiving, mental health, elder abuse, and palliative care. In 2003 and in 2012, she received the Queen's Jubilee Award presented by the Canadian Home Care Association, awarded for her dedication in developing a national coalition to support the issues and challenges facing informal caregivers. Ms. Barylak also co-edited a book for healthcare professionals, Responding Creatively to the Needs of Caregivers. She has been a key architect of screening and assessment tools of family caregivers, for which she provides training to healthcare professionals across North America. Lucy consults for private industry, including WellMed Charitable Foundation and clinics in Texas. Additionally, Lucy is a liaison supervisor at the School of Social Work at McGill University, where she currently supervises 20 interns. Now let me tell you a little bit about Elliot Sklar. He is a public health professional focused upon supporting the health of the public through academic work, research, and service. He has led healthy aging programs for seniors and for caregivers in Canada, Florida, and virtually. Dr. Sklar is an associate professor of healthcare sciences at Nova Southeastern University in Florida. He publishes and presents his work internationally, which is focused on the complexity of issues related to aging and caregiving. Welcome, Lucy and Elliot.
Hi, thank you so much. And we were talking about our bios ahead of the hour, and I realized I forgot to send my specific bio for this program on. But some of you might be wondering, how do we come to be talking about disaster preparedness? And it's something that I've really been very passionate about for the last 15 or so years, not only because I live in Florida, but because I work with seniors and caregivers. And I have seen how vulnerable these groups can be when it comes to being prepared for different kinds of disasters. So I have actually traveled across the state of Florida, providing trainings to federally qualified health centers on disaster preparedness, both to help healthcare facilities continue their operations during and after a storm, because we know that the need to provide care is so critical and it doesn't stop just because of a weather event, but also working with different long-term care facilities to help them with their planning and working with caregivers directly. So it's an honor to be here with all of you today. And we're really going to explore not just hurricanes, even though the photo here certainly denotes that, but how to prepare for all kinds of things, including winter storms, power outages, which have been more common. For those of you who've been watching the news, we've had a very odd hurricane season. There was just a storm that struck the maritime area of Canada, oddly, and here I am in Florida. And so far, so good, but there is an active area in the Atlantic that we are watching at present. And another thing is that I think we all pretty much know at this point that it's been the hottest summer on record. So I am aware of many seniors, for example, in Texas and in Florida, who had very hard times during power outages and at times when their AC broke, and how just to get through that. So I think there are more intense weather systems that we have across the board, and it's creating, I think, different concerns for the general public, but even more so for seniors and caregivers. Now, as it relates to hurricane season, the official start was on June 1st, Many people don't know that September 10th is actually the peak of the Atlantic hurricane season. So we're just about a week out from that. And as I said, we've been pretty lucky so far. Knock on wood, I don't have any with me, but I do have other props that I will share later in our program today. Because again, we're not just going to talk about hurricanes. Many of the tips for hurricane preparedness apply for a number of different disasters. And what's most critical is how we prepare for them. That's why September is actually National Preparedness Month in the United States each year. And that is coordinated by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, from whom I am credentialed and certified as well. And this year, their focus was actually quite interesting. The campaign or the theme around this year's Preparedness Month is Take Control in 1, 2, 3. And the campaign focuses on preparing older adults for disasters, specifically those who are in communities disproportionately impacted by weather events. Now, we know older adults can face greater risks when it comes to magnitude of extreme weather events, even dehydration during heat. And especially if they're living alone, low income, have a disability, or live in a rural area, they are more at risk. So a lot of what we're going to discuss today, as I said, applies to winter storms, tornadoes, wildfires, power outages. Really, the key difference between some of these events is just simply the time that we do have to prepare. So these concerns we've been discussing for a few years now on the Caregiver Teleconnection about how important planning is, small or big. And despite FEMA's focus this year on older adults, there are actually very few tangible resources and information that they have out there for caregivers. What I think might be the most promising thing to have happened this year, and I mentioned this during our program last week on a different topic, is that FEMA signed an agreement with the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers to develop materials and programs specifically for caregivers as it relates to preparedness. And as I said during that program last week, here we are, and here we have been talking with caregivers about preparedness for years. So I hope we're a little bit ahead of the curve. And I wanted to share something personal with you all so that you get a better sense of my interest and where we come to talk about this topic today. Now, I grew up very close to where Lucy lives in Canada. And when I moved to Florida to go to graduate school, we had a tropical storm hit within a few weeks of my relocating. And I was living on South Beach, about a mile to the beach at that time, not even, I would say a half mile. I was terrified. I did not know what to do, where to go. I didn't know how to access local shelters, how to get there. And so I bought inflatable pool rafts and I duct taped them to my windows so that in case of anything hitting through the windows, I thought I'd be safe. But obviously, if something was going to come through a window, that inflatable pool raft was going to deflate very quickly from the broken glass. And obviously, it wasn't going to be the way that I had planned for it. I got lucky and I was okay, but it caused me to recognize how very important it is to feel prepared. And that's something that Lucy is going to talk about a lot today too, is especially how to help quell the anxiety of individuals with cognitive impairment. Because as we know, weather events, power outages, all these things can be very, very scary. The same holds true for long-term care facilities. This is an example. When there's a power outage, sometimes those very bright emergency lights go on in the hallways, if you know what I'm talking about, if you've been in a hospital or a health facility. Well, for someone that has cognitive impairment, that can be very, very frightening. So we're going to talk about, really how to prepare, but also how to keep calm. And another anecdote here, when I started my career on Miami Beach in the late 2000s, I was working as a health programs manager in a community center that was just a few blocks from a beach, and pictured right here, the South Shore Community Center. Now, I actually was running South Florida's first falls prevention program at the time in one of our classrooms on the first floor of this building on this particular day. And I was attending an administration meeting on the second floor. And as you can see, there are stairs that lead up. Our conference room was completely soundproof. It was built of concrete cinder blocks. This building is a historic landmark building built in the 1950s. And out of nowhere, we had no warning, a rainstorm that lasted not even an hour because I was in that meeting the whole time came and I didn't even hear it. But within that hour, the amount of rain was something I had never before seen. And here's a photo of my car parked outside of the building that afternoon. I'll never forget that day or my walk home. But aside from that, I mentioned that we had seniors on the ground floor of this building. Water started coming into the building, and we had to evacuate people up into the second floor. But the elevator shaft had flooded out, and we had no choice but to help bring these people up that set of stairs that I showed you in the first photo, which actually was outside in the rain. So imagine people carrying seniors on their backs, because many of them had disabilities of varying degrees, up the stairs. And as a facility, we were so completely unprepared. And as I said, this was just a rain event. This wasn't a tropical storm or a hurricane. It happened within the course of an hour. It happened again this past year in Fort Lauderdale. I'm sure many of you had seen the news that our airports were closed. The city was underwater. Our city hall has been completely flooded out and is no longer an operable building. So since this photo was taken, I have lived in Florida now for 19 years, been through 2 Category 3 storms while sheltering in place, and I understand just how important it is to prepare. So we have a lot of information that we'll be providing to people today. You might want to get a pen and a pencil if you want, but as Glenda said, we will be sharing a recording, and also we will be sharing a copy of our slides today. So I really think the best thing we can do is to feel prepared when it comes to any kind of weather system. That includes the winter storm that you all had in Texas 2 years ago as well. Montreal earlier in the year, there was a power outage that lasted a few days. Many seniors that live in high-rise buildings without generators were stuck in their apartments, not able to get downstairs. And these things can be crises for caregivers, just accessing someone, getting help that you might need. So having things on hand is very important. And this is just a collection of photos here that I've taken over the course of our many years living here in Florida. This was this past year, that infamous rainstorm that I was telling you about in Fort Lauderdale, where I live, and you can see that the runways of the airport were flooded out and the amount of rain that we had. So one of the best things that I think I've learned, and I think that'll be a theme for our program today, is preparing shouldn't feel overwhelming. And a great thing that you can do to make it feel less overwhelming is at this time of the year, anytime, get an extra bottle of water or a can of non-perishable food when you go out to the store. Stocking up on things slowly helps us to feel like it's a little bit less overwhelming. In the same way that if my car goes under a half a tank of fuel at this time of the year, I fuel up, because I also recognize that even if a storm doesn't hit my area specifically, that can interrupt fuel being delivered to the state of Florida as a whole. We're a peninsula. So these are things that I keep in mind. I've also learned at this time of the year to have less in my freezer. Now, this is helpful in the event of a power outage, but at the same time, I choose to keep my freezer full, but what I fill up are large bags of Ziploc filled water. The reason being that these chunks of ice that form in these Ziploc bags, if we do have a power outage, will keep things in my freezer cooler for a longer period of time. Or if I want to transfer those chunks of ice into a cooler, they will melt a lot slower than cubed ice will. It's a simple thing many people don't think of, but it's an easy, free thing that we can do to keep around. You can also grab those bags of frozen water and take them in a cooler bag when you go to the grocery store. I like to think of things that you don't need to buy in addition to things that you already might not be needing to purchase. And I think that's a tip I've learned over the years recently too. There are a lot of things around our homes that can come in very handy. One of the other things is the importance of having batteries and battery packs as well. I have learned that many things nowadays, and we'll talk about this in a little, have rechargeable batteries in them. That's great, like our cell phones as an example. However, if you lose power, how are you going to charge those devices? So getting a backup battery pack, which they sell everywhere these days, is very important. But you might want to consider getting one not just for your phone, but for some other devices too. They do sell larger ones. And we'll talk more about that too, because some people might need them as an example for a CPAP or for oxygen if in the event of a power failure. So these are very important things to keep in mind, and everyone's situation might be a little bit different. I always have battery backups that are fully charged for my cell phone. I make sure that they're fully charged at all times. We have had a number of power outages nationally this year, and that has been very disruptive for people, not just from a matter of convenience, but a matter of safety. And I know many of us, I'm sure, feel very anxious if we don't have our phone on us. So if your phone is dead, it's like you don't have it. So very important to keep those battery backups. You can also use your car as an example to help charge your phone. Another thing that I've learned over the years is that if cell service is interrupted and you cannot make a call, most often you can still send text messages. And our communication system is designed in that way for it to work that way. So remember that as well, that if you lose cell service, you can still most likely send a text message. So those are just some very important basic things that I want to remind everyone of at this time of the year. I think it's important. The other thing, oh, go ahead, Lucy.
No. I'm just saying those are really, really important little tips.
They are. And the other most important thing that I have learned is that it's so important to manage our anxiety and stress, but not just when it comes to a crisis, on a routine basis. And this is something Lucy and I talk about a lot. We actually have a program next month called Our Health is Our Wealth, where we talk about the importance of health promotion for caregivers. Because when we practice stress management techniques, for example, on a routine basis, we're more likely to be able to manage the stress of a crisis. And that's why we talk about self-care.
For sure. You know, one of the things that storms always brings about is a sense of anxiety, stress, which is normal. I mean, just to think about it. You know, strong emotions like fear, sadness, or other symptoms of depression are normal as long as they are temporary and don't interfere with daily activities. If these emotions last too long or cause other problems, it's a different story. Sometimes stress can be good. It can help you develop skills needed to manage potentially threatening situations. Stress can be harmful, however, when it's prolonged or severe enough to make you feel overwhelmed and out of control. And that would challenge your ability to plan and prepare as you might need to ahead of a storm. The best ways to manage stress in hard times are through self-care. And self-care is part of the disaster being prepared. If we adopt habits that are healthy, that set us up to cope better with stressful times, coping techniques like taking breaks, eating healthy foods, and exercise can help prevent and reduce burnout and secondary traumatic stress. Recognize the signs of burnout and stress and be sure those who need a break or need help can address these needs. As part of our preparation planning, think about what you would do to manage stress in a crisis situation. So what I mean by that is that we all know, we have our little coping skills. So if you're stressed, it's important. It's okay to be stressed because it's actually saying to you, I need to prepare. Something's going on. So if you are stressed or you're anxious or you're frightened, take control over that. And you can by being prepared.
Absolutely. I'm curious if anyone has any things that they do or that they turn to for when they feel that they're in crisis, to bring them a sense of calm or relief. I wasn't talking about vodka.
Margarita.
As I was taking a sip of my water.
Okay, right. So just unmute your microphone if you would like to join in. I see someone has called in on their telephone. You can press *6 on your telephone and that will unmute it and you can join the conversation that way. Chat box is open. Feel free to use that.
I always like to ask the question because we learn a lot from one another's tips and things that we have engaged or used to help us through crisis. For those of you who've participated before, you know that I turn to exercise. And usually ahead of storms, I used to go for walks until the weather would start to turn, because when storms come, gyms close, and at least exercise is something that I can still do outside as a way of helping to cope. Plus, typically during a storm, we're sheltering inside, so it gives me a chance to balance my indoor time with a little outdoor time. Right, well, if anyone has anything that they want to share, feel free to enter it into the text box and we will continue. I think of disaster preparedness very practically, because that makes sense. But part of our preparing deals with things that aren't as practical, perhaps, like taking care of our overall health or our well-being. Now, we talk about that a lot, but our home, our apartment, our home environment also needs to be taken care of routinely. So think about things that you might have, for example, outside. Are there tree limbs that might need to be trimmed or garages that need to be cleared out of clutter? Do you need help doing those things? Because again, planning requires sometimes that if we need help from others, we ask early. Could you move items from your balcony or patio into your apartment safely if you had to? Could you lift them? Now, these are things that are very important that many of us don't think of. Things that unfortunately here in Florida, I have to think of often. So as an example, all of our heavy potted plants that are outside, they are all on planter caddies with wheels, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to move them on my own. It's one less thing to worry about, but these are all things to consider. Does your bathtub drain? Does it stop so that you can keep water in your tub if you have to? Many people I know have had water interruptions this year also. I have a 92-year-old cousin whose water was shut off the last 24 hours in her building for maintenance repairs. So she had to fill her tub so that if she went to the toilet, she could flush it with water from the tub. These are things that people don't think about, but things that are very important. And I've learned from personal experience. When I needed to fill up my bathtub, my drain had a leak, or where it allowed the water to leak out. So I couldn't fill it. And I used duct tape to try to seal it, but that didn't work. So these are, take all of my experiences and learn from them. Another thing that is so important that people consider is, where is your car parked? Is it outside? Is it under a tree? Many people don't have garaged parking available to them. And this is not an obvious part of planning. In fact, if you see most preparedness tip sheets, for example, they will not really tell you to think about your home environment if you're sheltering in place or where you might park a car. But if you're a caregiver and you need to evacuate, or if you need to take a loved one to a medical appointment, or these things are very important. And to that end, I think one of the hardest things for people to decide is whether to stay or to go if a storm comes. That answer is going to be different for everyone based upon where you live, how close you are to water, if it's a winter storm, if it's a hurricane. This is also especially very difficult for people who might have mobility issues or incontinence issues, people who might wander, for example. So we're going to talk about some of those things, but for many people, the decision to stay or to go can be like weighing two bad options. And that said, it's really important to have an evacuation plan if an evacuation is ordered where you might be living. So I always recommend that people consider where they go if they might need to evacuate. And it might be important to look for shelters locally that cater to people with special healthcare needs, and also those that are open to pets if you have them. You can pre-register for these shelters, and you can call 211 in your local community to get information about the shelters in your community and how to pre-register. It's always advisable that if you have the means to be able to stay with friends or family, or the financial means to stay perhaps at an extended stay hotel rather, that you consider those options too. One thing, as I mentioned, that we don't consider often with these hotels along major highways is parking. And even though people might drive away from a coast or inland from a storm, torrential rain can still cause flooding, as can high winds. So I always recommend to people to try to think about that and think about finding a hotel or a motel that has elevated or garaged parking. I know that's not always an option, but something to consider as you plan. Just as an example, if you have someone with complex health needs that you're caring for, you may want to consider trying to stay closer to a major city center that has healthcare centers. As we know, along major highways in rural areas, there are not always an availability of close hospitals or emergency rooms. These things are important. One of my greatest fears in evacuating is, for example, if I was staying at a motel off the highway in the middle of nowhere and winds came that way, what would happen to my car? How would I get home? So these things are important to consider. And one of the perks to staying in a city center, if possible, is that you'll have more options as well for finding hotels that do have garage parking, as well as hospitals. And as we know, if services like electricity or cable or telecommunications get interrupted, they're most likely restored first to cities as opposed to rural areas. You might also want to look for hotels that have handicap accessible rooms. This is another thing to think about depending on the needs of the individual for whom you're providing care. Now, the good thing about planning is that you have time to do that. And Google is an amazing resource as an example to help you plan, because there are maps and photos and reviews. You can also look at routes, east, north, south, west. You also can look at what might be around a hotel, like a grocery store or a pharmacy, things that might be necessary if you need them. So planning allows us to have the luxury to think ahead about these things. And I was curious if anyone participating today had some other helpful tips that they might want to share.
So once again, just unmute your microphone or press *6 if you dialed in and join us in this conversation. I was going to say one thing, Elliot. I don't have a bathtub, and we did have that big Snowmageddon event, which we tried to prepare for based on information you had shared with us. So I had rolling ice chests that I filled with water, and it worked very well.
Absolutely. Some people also get those buckets that they sell at Lowe's and Home Depot, because that way you can keep water close to a toilet to be able to pour it in if you need to. These are very important. Absolutely.
I remember, Elliot, that you had recommended that I got this little charger for my phone and other devices, and it really lasts for a long, long time. I have it with me. I always make sure every few months that it's charged completely, and it's really has really saved us from when there was an electricity shortage or things like that. So what exactly do you call that little charger? I did get it at the Walmart, so maybe you could pass that on.
Sure. It's called a power bank or a battery bank, and I'm going to talk about those. I think also it gives us peace of mind. You know, I was talking about the anxiety that I have if I'm away from my phone, because we become so accustomed to being able to communicate at any point if we need to. So having the ability to know that you can keep charging your battery is really very important, especially if you're a caregiver. And one last point I wanted to make about evacuation planning is that if you have a loved one whom you're caring for that wanders, please look for hotels that have indoor hallways, as opposed to those hotels that allow you to open a door to be outside. This is so important because if your loved one wanders, you can alert hotel staff. They're in more of a contained area. There are usually cameras. So we're going to talk more about that too, but it is something to consider as you're looking for places along the road. That's what I love about Google, is that you can look at photos so you can see if they have an indoor hallway, outdoor entrances to rooms. These are things that are very important if you're a caregiver.
I see that the person who has called in on their phone has unmuted. Would you like to go ahead?
Yes, I had a question about if you're caring for someone who is bedridden, and you are going to have to stay put.
Great
unless
question.
They get the fire department or to go in. But the other thing is, a lot of cities are going to senior living and apartment complexes. So you have a vast number of people who are isolated most of the time. If they don't have anybody living with them, they are there in their homes. And I guess if they have family or somebody who can work with them to see that they might have the items that you are saying that you have. But the new traffic patterns they're making in some cities are single lanes. And so if we have a natural disaster, especially if it snows, you won't be able to get out of the building to go to a shelter or somewhere else. So we need to start, or maybe for the next time, you can be thinking of what we can do in those situations, because you're not going to have the option of leaving. And so I guess you
absolutely
survive as long as you can survive. But we're going to be situated, and I'm concerned because in my city, I think we're going to have that disaster this year if we get the snow that we have not had for a couple of years. So I wanted to know some things that we may be able to do in that situation.
These are great questions, and you asked a couple of them, and I have answers. You had asked, what if you have someone at home that is bedbound? Again, calling 211 at any point ahead of any disaster is important to alert people to the fact that you have someone at home that is bedbound. That way, if there is a disaster, the authorities have you on a list, and we will talk about that for power restoration as well, because then you're made a priority. And it's important that you notify your local authorities, your fire department, and that can all be coordinated through 211. You mentioned another good thing about an increase in people in long-term care and seniors who might be isolated. So if you are a caregiver and you have a loved one who is in a facility, ask the facility what their disaster preparedness plans are. I've worked with many facilities to help them create their plans. If they receive any kind of funding, accreditation, they are required to have these plans, and they are required to make you aware of what those plans are. If you feel like you want to have what we call a grab and go bag, or a disaster preparedness kit, as it's sometimes called, for that loved one, you can buy them on Amazon. You can make them yourself. It's a great idea, and I recommend anyone with a loved one in a long-term care facility to have one of these on hand for your loved one with them in their room. In case of anything, it will help keep them more comfortable, safer, and you more confident that they're okay as well.
I think for sure those are great questions, and we're going to answer them a little bit more in details as we go along, because they're really very, very important.
And Andre said that many camping articles can be useful. For example, water containers, portable stove, compact warm blankets, flashlights with long life. Excellent, excellent point. And we're going to bring that up as well. And I have some props that I said I was going to share with you all, because those are all great things. And I like the idea also of not having to purchase preparedness items exclusively. Many of us don't have the budgets to be stocking up on things that we might or might not need. So I think that there are better ways nowadays that we can be creative, especially as caregivers. I think that's one of the strong suits for caregivers is creativity, and we'll explore that a little bit. But I want to ask one practical question of Lucy, because many caregivers have a challenging time at the best of times dealing with medication management for their loved one. So during a time of crisis or a time when you may not have ideal access to storing medications as you normally would, Lucy, can you talk about how to keep medications safe and what to do with medications around crisis events?
Right. One of the biggest concerns when a hurricane approaches and forces people to leave home or stay home is running out of prescription medication or medical supplies that patients need on a regular basis to treat chronic conditions. At this time of the year, don't wait to fill prescriptions until you're almost out. Ask your doctor for a 90-day supply of medication if you can, for yourself and for the person to whom you are caring for. That way, you're more likely to have extra on hand for your medication go bag. This can also save you a little bit of money, so look into that. Always fill prescription on the first day you become eligible for a refill rather than waiting until the day you run out. If you are able to obtain an emergency supply, especially establish a plan for rotating your go-back supplies so that it remains up to date. And remember to check the medication periodically to ensure that they have not expired. So during an emergency, some states allow pharmacists to dispense an emergency supply of medication without the doctor authorization. And if a known potential disasters, if they know that it's coming, such as a hurricane that is predicted, make sure you have the prescription meds and supplies before it hits. You might also ask your health insurance company to assist you to obtaining enough medication and supplies to have on hand. So, Elliot, you were saying how to store medication. That's really important. Some prescription medication require refrigeration. Others may not, but could get damaged by excessive heat. Talk to your pharmacist now about how to handle your medications if the power goes out. Ice packs and cooler bags might be part of your preparation list items. Once you've gathered your supplies and you pack the items in an easy to carry, water-resistant bag, store it in a dry, cool place in your home. Keep the kit in a secure place that's easy to access in a hurry, but out of reach. For example, on a high shelf in your bedroom closet. Check your emergency kit regularly and dispose and replace any out-of-date supplies. So, tendency is you want to throw these out, but I would recommend it all if you cannot throw them into the toilet, onto the garbage, put them aside, and when you can, return them back to the pharmacy. That would be the ideal things. Any damaged medications or pills that are wet or look or smell different, they could be contaminated by moisture. So please be very, very careful about that. Now, prepare a detailed list of your prescription medications now. I'm sure you all are doing it, but be very vigilant and also include over-the-counter medication that you're using. That's important too. Keep it with you inside a waterproof zip bag. You can make a copy for the emergency contact that you have. You may consider laminating it, or most people might just take a picture with your phone so you have it on hand. Know how to get medication refills in a disaster area. That's important to know. As Elliot was saying, you could always call 211 to get information. If your medications get damaged by water or heat, or if you lose them, make sure that you have refills, as I said. And, a lot of them are available at national pharmacy chains like Walgreens, CVS, and even stores like Walmart. Being prepared by keeping a steady supply of your much needed medication is an essential part of your being prepared for any disaster. And as I said, as well as over-the-counter medications that you usually use. So having said that about medication, and I know even when you're going on a trip, it's so important to always make sure that you've got everything prepared, and especially when they are predicting that we are going to have some storms. So I was wondering, does anyone have any questions about medications? I do want to emphasize that heat can damage a prescription. And so if you're in a very hot, and obviously moisture, so keeping it waterproof is important. Now, I know Glenda didn't say it, but I was a caregiver for my mother for many, many years, and medications is really a big issue. And so it's really important to keep it in a safe place and that you're prepared for any disaster that comes along. So I'm just wondering, does anyone have any questions about how to safeguard your medications? Now, all of these slides you will be getting, so you don't have to write it all down once you're registered with us.
Christine, please go ahead. Christine, did you have a question or a comment?
No.
Okay, I guess that was a mistake.
Okay.
All right.
I'm going to mute that back. I found after learning about the Lucy, I've been with you on medication management presentations. So I have a go bag that has 2 weeks of medications in it. I put a reminder on my telephone, Lucy, of when it's time to check those expiration dates. So that's a good thing to do also.
Yes.
Bravo.
That's a wonderful tip. Thank you so much, Glenda.
You get an A+ in my class.
Thank you, Elliot. Anyone have a question or comment before we go to the next part of the presentation? Okay, let's go forward. We got a lot of information left.
Yes, and not much time, but we'll make it work. So I have included this disaster supply checklist, which you'll all guess. The reason that I've included this one and not others is that I appreciate it still contains some COVID supplies. If you know, you know, and we have a resurgence of COVID, obviously not the same strains and same severity that we had a few years back, but it is a concern if you are going to be in a shelter. As an example, we don't know who are in shelters with us, and masks are no longer required. So some caregivers are caring for people who have compromised immune systems, as an example, something that you need to think about. Another important thing that I have recently noticed that I mentioned is that most things these days have rechargeable battery packs, and that includes a lot of those camping supplies that Andre mentioned. This is a lantern that I will talk about in my next slide, which is an example of one of those things that has a rechargeable battery pack. The problem is when you really need these things in a pinch, if these things are not already charged and ready for you to go, how do you charge them? The same holds true for battery operated fans, flashlights. A lot of these things nowadays have rechargeable battery packs. So please keep that in mind and try to find things that actually take batteries, because if you're without power, batteries will be most helpful. And we have had this question before. What if you're on oxygen or you use a CPAP to help you sleep, to breathe for sleep apnea? What do you do during a power outage? Call the 911 non-emergency number in your area. That is very important. As I was mentioning, you would be placed on a priority list for your power to be restored, but also if you had to be evacuated from your residence, then most likely a fire truck would come and pick you up and take you to the station where they might have power or a generator until you're able to get your power back. So plan ahead. Also contact your electrical company. There is something called a medically essential service letter that your doctor can provide for you, which would reaffirm again, if you need to have electricity, you would get priority in being having your power restored or being taken somewhere that does have at least a generator, as an example. Very important. People don't think about this. We had a power outage in my neighborhood, and my neighbor is on oxygen, and he started to panic, which certainly didn't help his breathing. and we managed to get, a fire truck out to them. But people don't think about these things, so think about them. Now, I've talked before about lanterns, and lanterns are so important because bright lights from flashlights can be very scary for people who might have cognitive decline, even visual impairment of different kinds. So at the top here are these wonderful lanterns that I discovered a few years ago on Amazon. They even have a port for you to charge your cell phone. But I encourage you to make sure, again, just as you check with everything else, that your devices are still working. This is my lantern from last year. As you see, it has a plug. I can charge it, but if I don't have power, then I have the solar panels here to allow me to charge it. Great idea. But it's been charging all morning in the sun and it doesn't work. So I need to replace it. I wanted to share with everyone a new thing that I've talked about before, and these are these puck lights that you can get on Amazon. You press it on and the light comes on. You can buy them at the dollar store too. But what I like about this is something that you can use. For example, Glenda, in your closets behind you, you can use the double-sided tape that comes with it and stick them to your doors on the inside of your closet so that you can see your stuff better. They also come with a remote control. So if you have someone that you're caring for that has visual impairment, as an example, I can make the light much dimmer. See if this works here. It did before. But there we go. The light is much less bright now, so less scary for someone who might have visual impairment, and more closely resembles a soft light like a lantern. If you don't have that around, you can use an empty water jug and place it atop a flashlight like in the photo at the bottom. The reason that I like these little puck lights is because you can keep them pretty much anywhere. They run on batteries, 3 AAA batteries, easy to replace, but they have utility outside of just a storm. So if I needed to, I could grab them with me for a storm, but if I don't need them, then I can keep them in my closet and see my clothes better. So it's just an example of things that I think we can find around that might be helpful that we wouldn't normally only buy for a storm.
Did
Well,
you
those
see
are
Andre's comment there in the chat box, Elliot?
Since the ice storm of '98 in our area, we've had a long discharge battery. It has been very useful for our electrical devices since then during power shortages. Absolutely. And just like that battery bank that Lucy and I were talking about for your cell phone, you can get much larger battery banks these days that can actually charge multiple things at the same time, allow you to even watch a television, which can be very helpful, especially again, if you have someone around that you need to keep distracted.
Well, those are a lot of things. I'm just looking at our time. My goodness, yes, we have a lot more to discuss. So let me kind of go through it. Storms can be the hardest for people with Alzheimer's and dementia and their caregivers. If a person with dementia or Alzheimer's lives in a resident building or attends a day center, learn about its disaster and evacuation plan. Find out who is responsible for evacuating everyone in the event of the emergency. So if you are evacuating with someone who suffers from one of these conditions, there are additional things you want to pack in your grab bag and go back, including, it's important to have ID, bracelets, recent picture of the person in case of wandering, earphones for music, because loud areas may increase agitation of your loved one. And it's good to have simple activities to keep them occupied. Photo albums are great, scrapbook, coloring book, pencils, anything that the person really likes. And it's also important to enroll in a wandering response service. And most important is stay calm, okay? Please try and stay calm. The Alzheimer's Association has a 24/7 hotline, and the number is right there for those who are not on the phone. It's 800-272-3900. So do your best to keep calm. As I said, individuals with dementia they take cues from you, from the caregiver. So if they feel that you are panicking or anxious, they will sense that and feel unsafe. Scared feelings can cause agitation and challenging behavior. Keep reassuring them that they are safe and realize that they may not understand what is going on. Use private moments to process your own fears and emotions, like step away if you're really getting so anxious so that they don't see it. You might also find helpful to call the Alzheimer's Association to speak to somebody if you really don't seem to be able to manage your agitation and you're scared yourself. Preparation for a storm can often generate even more stress than we experience during the actual event, okay? So gathering all those supplies, all the things that Elliot and I were talking about. Elliot addressed things to take during the evacuation, but when you are sheltering at home, maintain a 2-week stock of the medical supplies that are so important, and things that you need for diabetic supplies. You can always ask your doctor for prescribe a little bit more of that medication. And just keep things that you need, like, for example, it could be wipes, Kleenex, anything that you need. But I do want to quickly talk about, in case the person does become agitated, even if you're at home or maybe you're sheltering somewhere else, again, reassure the person, hold hands, put your arm on his or her shoulder or their shoulder, say things that are going to be fine. Find outlets for anxiety, energy, try to engage them, take them to another area if they really become very agitated. What I mean by that, you wanted to redirect the person's attention so that they're not as upset. Make the person, make them safe. Make them feel safe. As I said, you could move them somewhere else a little bit so that it's a little bit less noisy. Make sure the person takes the medication as schedule regular meals, and maintain a regular sleep schedule if at all possible. As long as you can maintain some sort of a normal routine, that will help them a lot. Avoid detailed explanations they might not be able to understand. Provide additional assistance with all the activities of daily living. If you're sheltering somewhere else, they might not, be familiar, so you might have to do a little bit more. Pay attention to cues that the person may be overwhelmed, they're fidgeting, they're pacing, they might need to go to the bathroom a little bit more often. Remind the person that they are okay, that you're here and you're taking care of that. So go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm going to quickly wrap up so that Glenda has a couple of minutes to share last information. But I know it's a lot of information that we've shared. As I said, we're going to be providing a copy of our presentation from today. I think the key takeaways are here. Get in touch with 211 in your local community, pre-register for the support services you might need. Keep in touch by text with friends, family, if you do need to evacuate, and keep copies, even a photo of a list of prescriptions, ID, medications, a recent photo of your loved one if they wander. And then, of course, our resources. We have many of them. There are so many different grab and go kit resources, tools that are here. So again, preparing gives us the luxury of time to go through all of these things and take from them what is most helpful to our unique situation. So again, I want to thank everyone. If you have questions, feel free to enter them in the chat while Glenda shares some last information.
Thank you, Elliot and Lucy. I just always like to go through our calendar for the Caregiver Teleconnection in case you've missed it. Tomorrow, Lucy and Elliot and I will be back doing the last in the series of Engaging Caregivers, a program for healthcare workers. That will be at 10 o'clock Central Time. And we're going to be talking about diversity in caregiving. So another interesting topic. And then on Thursday, September the 21st at noon, we'll have a presentation by Dr. Natalie Oliver. If you haven't heard her before, please tune in because she's just a wonderful presenter. She's going to be talking about healthy brain and healthy aging. So those are two that are this week I wanted to let you know about. Let's see, did we have another comment here in the, yes, we do.
Andre had said, I had no doubt about the usefulness of this presentation, but did not quite know what to expect as far as content. This is just great. I will make sure my colleague assigned to the crisis and emergency team in our CS Health Center receives a copy of the link to consult. Thank you. Thank you so much, Andre.
Yes, and thank you all for joining us today, and for Lucy and Elliot for, you've done this presentation before, but Lucy and I were talking about it. That doesn't mean you do the same presentation. You've updated everything. Everything is current. So I appreciate that very much. You can tell by my comments, I've learned a lot from these presentations. And I hope as a caregiver, you will take this to heart and start planning now. Get those things together that you may need in an emergency. Here in Texas, Elliot had talked about wildfires. We had them. Had one really close here. I was confident. I had my go bag ready to go. So it can happen to you. Be ready. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you maybe tomorrow or next week or the next time we're together. Thank you so much.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you so
Stay
much.
safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.